Are we alone in the universe? More than 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, and at least 500 billion planets in the Milky Way alone. Don't you think we should have found something by now? Even if a tiny percentage of those billions of planets hosted intelligent life, there would have to be tens of thousands of extraterrestrial civilizations out there. Yet, we haven't seen any. Look up at the stars tonight. Those twinkling diamonds are several thousand light years away. Our planet is just a grain of sand on a virtually endless beach, a small dot in a gigantic galaxy. Is it the only dot with life on it? That's a question humankind has been asking ever since we started to understand the basics of astronomy thousands of years ago. Now, we're closer than ever to finding the answer, as an unprecedented crush of ultra-powerful telescopes and interplanetary missions try to trace where else life might possibly exist. Today's Daily Dose travels to the far reaches of the universe on that search, taking you through the latest breakthroughs and the people behind them. Curious? You should be. Age-old search. Some 2,500 years ago, two Greek philosophers looked to the sky and wondered if humans were alone in the universe. Today, many scientists believe the question is a no-brainer. For decades, one of the fundamental laws of physics formed the basis of our understanding of life on Earth. The law of increasing entropy insists that energy tends to dissipate instead of coming together. Pour ink in water and watch it diffuse. If that's true for the universe, then the sublime marriage of millions of cells and molecules for the creation of life on Earth could be a low-probability fluke that needn't repeat itself. But some researchers now believe that the existence of extraterrestrial life doesn't necessarily violate that basic law. In fact, they argue it could be what drives the creation of living beings. And then there's simple math to consider. There are billions of galaxies in the universe, each one home to tens of billions of stars circled by at least a planet each. See where I'm going? From the first astronomer eager to catch audio signals using radio in the early 1900s to the rovers currently exploring Mars, our fascination with outer space has always, in part, had to do with the hunt for potential neighbors beyond our planet. Sophisticated new tools, including the soon-to-be-deployed largest telescope in history, are capable of exploring the atmosphere of planets trillions of miles away, potentially bringing us within reach of an answer. While Mars has long been the poster child for out-of-Earth exploration, it is, after all, the most similar to Earth in many ways. Scientists are expanding their horizons. In fact, researchers at Washington State University have already identified more than 20 planets outside our solar system that could sustain life even better than Earth. Don't pack your bags just yet though. They are all more than 100 light-years away. Meanwhile, even as it waits for a robotic rover to deliver Martian samples by the end of the decade, NASA wants to explore one of Jupiter's moons, Europa. The agency is planning to send a mission to probe Europa's frozen oceans and volcanoes as early as 2024. Another moon catching everyone's attention is Titan, Saturn's largest, where a mission will be launched to analyze liquid methane lakes in 2027. But some scientists are urging caution, saying the broadly accepted global guidelines on how to respond to a potential alien encounter are not enough. Physicist Mark Buchanan worries that these new civilizations could be more advanced and powerful than ours. Most stars in our galaxy are much older than the Sun. If civilizations arise fairly frequently on some planets, then there ought to be many civilizations in our galaxy millions of years more advanced than our own, he wrote in the Washington Post in June. On the opposite side is a slightly more eerie argument: if these super smart aliens wanted to kill us all, they would have already done it. What if we're the aliens on Earth? While a recently declassified report on alleged UFO sightings by US Navy pilots raised more questions than it provided answers, some prominent scientists have been positing a much more interesting theory, that life on Earth could have actually originated on Mars, making us, well, Martians. How life forms when planets cool down and liquid water eventually emerges. Evidence is increasingly pointing to the fact that Mars formed and cooled down before Earth, and that it had methane, an ingredient for the birth of life. Add that to the theory that various forms of life travel across the universe to throw asteroids and other debris, and you have a hypothesis more credible than distant sightings by pilots that could be explained in part by optical illusions. Scientists have recently discovered more than 2,000 stars from where Earth would be visible when it passed in front of the Sun. That means that aliens with powerful telescopes and planets near those stars could actually be looking at us without visiting us. On UFOs, the good news? Hector Socas Navarro, an astrophysicist at the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands, says that if there's life out there, we currently have a good chance of finding it. The new large telescopes will allow us to scrutinize the chemical composition of many exoplanet atmospheres, he tells OZ. With those tools, we could find life elsewhere within the next 10 to 20 years. From the moment Galileo Galilei, one of modern astronomy's founding fathers, pointed his telescope upward in the 1600s, the instrument has been central to our understanding of the universe. It helped early scientists study the surface of our moon and discover Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons. Since then, telescopes have evolved in ways the Italian astronomer probably never dreamed of. In 1931, American engineer Carl Jansky's giant rotating antennas detected the first radio signal from the center of the Milky Way. And more than 7 decades later, NASA's Kepler Space Telescope identified thousands of planets that orbit around stars other than the Sun between 2009 and 2018. While China and the European Space Agency, apart from America, are investing in new rovers to explore Mars' surface, modern versions of the telescope represent our best shot at discovering the truth about possible extraterrestrial life. China recently unveiled one of the largest single-dish observatories in the world, so sensitive that it can detect anything from dead stars to hydrogen in distant galaxies. Meanwhile, NASA is preparing to send up the James Webb Space Telescope this year. This $10 billion observatory will work from space, its state-of-the-art technology allowing it to look through the gas and dust that usually obscure the view for other telescopes. Telescopes are poised to become ever more sophisticated, with the ability to provide better images of smaller planets located farther away. The giant Magellan Telescope in Chile and the European Extremely Large Telescope, brownie points for original naming, are both due to be up and running by 2025. They promise to deliver images so sharp scientists might be able to identify the fine imprint that molecules leave in the atmospheres of other planets, tracking clues to the possibility of life. Another Harvard University-led project will search for possible technologies aliens might have discarded as junk. Meanwhile, other researchers are developing ultra-fast light-driven nanocrafts, similar to the ones aliens could have, to launch toward Alpha Centauri, the star system closest to ours, about 25 trillion miles away, that could potentially harvest life. Why is it so important to search for life elsewhere? Astrophysicist Socas Navarro tells OZ the answer is simple: all the life that we know descends from one line. Biology has only one sample to work with in trying to understand life itself and how it originates. It's like trying to study medicine in a world with only one person. Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson aren't the only billionaires locked in a space race. Milner, an Israeli-Russian businessman and one of the moneybags behind Facebook and Twitter, founded Breakthrough Initiatives in 2015 and has invested more than $200 million in the search for alien life on Jupiter, Saturn and in the clouds over Venus. The businessman, who was named after the Russian astronaut Yuri Gagarin, the first human to venture into space, has always been interested in what is out there. I think it is only appropriate that we, as a civilization, devote at least some resources to try and ask the biggest existential questions. For example, are we alone in the universe? He told Tech. But his biggest strength might be his proximity to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who heads of state with one of the world's most sophisticated space programs at its disposal. If they exist, what do aliens look like? Are they green and cute as in E.T., tall and skinny as in Signs, human looking like Sally from Third Rock from the Sun, or perhaps angry and gooey like in Aliens? For decades, popular culture has stepped in where science has been unable to answer questions. Some argue these stories reflect other social fears. Think about the many reports of UFO sightings between 1952 and 1969 during the Cold War. Okay, that's Hollywood. What do scientists say about the way aliens might actually look? That we should look at evolution and keep an open mind. They argue that the way we humans look is pretty much a result of necessity: 2 eyes for wide vision, 2 ears for stereo audio, 2 legs to stand up and grab things from high up. Each species is different, based on their own evolutionary needs. So aliens can actually look completely different to us. Where we are going wrong is that we are only imagining being similar to creatures on Earth. What if we could combine scientific research with the spectacle of films? A series of cool new documentaries does just that, exploring some of the questions NASA scientists are asking themselves and offering a front-row seat to their findings. Among them is Nat Geo's Mars, a documentary-style fiction series that takes viewers on a trip over the next few decades as humans settle on Mars. Spoiler alert, it will take more than finding a new habitable planet to rid humanity of its problems. Ago, or 3, or 6, we would have also felt we knew the script in advance, thanks to the endless variations pop culture had played for us already. Civilizational conflicts to mirror the real world ones Americans had been imagining in terror since the beginning of the Cold War. But when, in December, the New York Times published an undisputed account of what might once have sounded like crackpot conspiracy theory, that the Pentagon had spent 5 years investigating unexplained aerial phenomena, the response among the paper's mostly liberal readers, exhausted and beaten down by recent events, was markedly different from the one in those movies. The news that aliens might actually be visiting us regularly and recently didn't provoke terror about a coming space opera conflict, but something much more like the evangelical dream of the rapture the same liberals might have mocked as cookie right-wing escapism in the George W. Bush years. The truth is out there, former Senator Harry Reid tweeted, with a link to the story. Thank God, came the response through the Twitter vent. Could extraterrestrials help us save the Earth? Went one typical reaction. But when, in December, the New York Times published an undisputed account of what might once have sounded like crackpot conspiracy theory, that the Pentagon had spent 5 years investigating unexplained aerial phenomena, the response among the paper's mostly liberal readers, exhausted and beaten down by recent events, was markedly different from the one in those movies. The news that aliens might actually be visiting us regularly and recently didn't provoke terror about a coming space opera conflict, but something much more like the evangelical dream of the rapture the same liberals might have mocked as cookie right-wing escapism in the George W. Bush years. The truth is out there, former Senator Harry Reid tweeted, with a link to the story. Thank God, came the response through the Twitter vent. Could extraterrestrials help us save the Earth? Went one typical reaction. Suddenly, aliens were an escapist fantasy, but also more credible, legitimized by the government, than mere fantasy. That Pentagon report, which featured 2 gripping videos of aerial encounters, was just one beat in a recent search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, drumroll. In October, an object passed through our solar system that looked an awful lot like a spaceship. Astronomers spent much of 2016 arguing over whether the weird pulses of light coming from a distant star were actually evidence of an alien megastructure. An army of Silicon Valley billionaires are racing to make first contact, and our new super-powered telescopes are discovering more conceivably habitable planets every year. Then, in March, a 3rd video emerged, featuring a Navy encounter off the East Coast in 2015, with the group that released it hinting at an additional trove. Why doesn't the Pentagon care? Wondered a Washington Post op-ed, surely the first time the newspaper Katharine Graham was raising a stink about aliens. The next week, President Trump seemed to announce he was creating an entirely new branch of the military. We'll call it the Space Force. You could be forgiven for thinking you'd woken up in a science fiction novel. At the very least, it is starting to seem non-crazy to believe. A recent study shows half the world already does. Alien dreams have always been powered by the desire for human importance in a vast, forgetful cosmos. We want to be seen, so we know we exist. What's unusual about the alien fantasy is that, unlike religion, nationalism, or conspiracy theory, it doesn't place humans at the center of a grand story. In fact, it displaces them. Humans become, briefly, major players in a drama of almost inconceivable scale, the lasting lesson of which is, unfortunately, we're total nobodies. That's the lesson, at least, of a visit from aliens who got here long before we were able to get there. Wherever there is, if humans are the ones making first contact, we're the advanced ones and the aliens are probably more like productive pond scum, which may be one reason we fantasize about those kinds of encounters. A lot less than visits to Earth. Of course, when the aliens are the explorers, we're the pond scum. But a lot of people in the modern world will take that bargain, which should probably not surprise us given how dizzying, secular, and, alienating that world objectively is. Most conspiracy theory is fueled by a desire to see the universe as ultimately intelligible, the bargain being that things can make sense, but only if you believe in pervasive totalitarian malice. Alien conspiracy theory keeps the malice cover-ups at Roswell, the Men in Black. But rather than benzo comforts like order and intelligibility, it offers the psychedelic drama of total unintelligibility, wonder, a knee-wobblingly deep, mystical experience of existential ignorance, which does mark a change. Beyond the mysticism, American stories of alien encounters have been often anxious meditations on the status of American power, meditations informed, surely, by both the memory of European settlers, for whom first contact was a story of triumphant genocide, and sympathy for those they trampled. Given the option, America will always prefer to play the cowboy, and through the post-Cold War 1990s, the dominant alien encounter template was still the swaggering military strut of Independence Day. The closest thing we got to a counterpoint was the cover-up paranoia of the X-Files, which just expressed a darker faith in the same American power. By the time we got an alien epic for the War on Terror era, even Spielberg staged it as a story about armed conflict, the War of the Worlds. Of course, in that story, the winner was always going to be the humans, that is, the Americans. And then came the financial crisis, the recession, and Trump, and the new hope that ET may take pity on us. 11 reasons to believe aliens are real. 1. The government literally just admitted it's taking UFOs seriously. In 1952, a CIA group called the Psychological Strategy Board concluded that when it came to UFOs, the American public was dangerously gullible and prone to hysterical mass behavior. The group recommended debunking campaigns to tamper the public's interest in unexplained phenomena. But the government seems to have been interested too. In December, the Pentagon confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, created in 2007 by Senators Ted Stevens, who reported being chased by a mysterious object, Daniel Inouye, and then Majority Leader Harry Reid, and funded with $22 million of black money from the Department of Defense's budget. The program investigated and evaluated reports of UFO sightings, many of which came from American service members. So much of what the program uncovered remains classified, but what little we know is tantalizing. Based on data it collected, the program identified 5 observations that showed mysterious objects displaying some level of advanced physics, also known as stuff humans can't do yet. The objects would accelerate with g-forces too strong for the human body to withstand, or reach hypersonic speed with no heat trail or sonic boom, or they seemed to resist the effects of Earth's gravity without any aerodynamic structures to provide thrust or lift. No one has been able to figure out what these are, said Luis Elizondo, who ran the program until last October, in a recent interview. 2. Scientists are suddenly much more bullish about the possibility of life out there. Just 30 years ago, we had not discovered a single planet outside our solar system. Now we know of more than 3,000 of them, and we know nearly every star in the night sky has at least one planet in its orbit. Even people who are not terribly interested in science know that we've found that planets are as common as fire hydrants. They're everywhere, says Seth Shostak, the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute. 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 might be a planet similar to the Earth. That doesn't mean we'll ever find an exact replica of Earth, but maybe we don't have to. Our study of other planets and moons in the solar system shows us many worlds possess the ingredients necessary for life: an atmosphere, organic compounds, liquid water, and other necessities. The moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, for example, feature whole subsurface oceans. And even though these places are extremely harsh environments, that doesn't mean as much as we might once have thought it did. Recent discoveries on Earth itself demonstrate that life is much tougher than we thought. We've found organisms in blisteringly hot geysers in Yellowstone National Park, in the darkest crevices under the most ungodly pressures in the deep ocean, in dry hellscapes like the Atacama Desert in Chile, an analog for Mars. These extremophiles don't need a warm and fuzzy paradise to call home. In fact, they have already evolved to live in environments as harsh as those on other planets. Some, like tardigrades, can even survive the bleak vacuum of space itself. If there's life in most of those places, it's going to be pond scum, says Shostak. But it's alien pond scum. It shows that biology is all over. 3. They're especially bullish about these planets. Scientists now think every 1 in 5 or 6 planets might be habitable, based on 2 general criteria: they're rocky, and they reside in a region of the star's orbit called the Goldilocks zone, where it's not too cold and not too hot, but just right to allow for liquid water to form on the surface. And where there's water, there can be life. Extraterrestrial researchers and enthusiasts are most excited about these 7. Proxima b, the closest exoplanet ever discovered, is also a potentially habitable world in its own right, if the intense stellar winds don't make it barren. It's not totally inconceivable we might be able to actually send a probe and study it directly this century. Even travel to it ourselves one day. TRAPPIST-1 system, the red dwarf at the center of this, possesses a whopping 7 planets in its orbit, 3 of which reside in the Goldilocks zone, but all of which seem to possess some degree of potential habitability, and they're so close to one another that life on one planet could quickly spread to another. LHS 1140b, this wouldn't be a planet we could colonize. It's almost 7 times the mass of the Earth and 40% larger, making it a super-Earth. But its mass means that it would retain a thicker atmosphere capable of keeping it warmer and more comfortable for life than most other places. Ross 128b, one of the best chances we have so far at finding life on another planet. It orbits an inactive red dwarf star, meaning it's likely not being bludgeoned by solar radiation. And we've detected strange signals emanating from the nearby host star, signals that perhaps have intelligent origins. You know this planet, right? Thias is Mars. Mars has water, as we've known since 2015. Although the planet looks like a barren wasteland these days, there's little reason to write off any chance we might find aliens residing in some cavern or crevice. The ocean worlds, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, many of Jupiter's and Saturn's moons show signs of possessing a liquid ocean underneath the surface. GJ 1214b, nicknamed Water World by scientists, signs of potential clouds give us some hope the planet has an atmosphere. 4. And there is documentation in 2012, the photographer Stephen Hirsch asked UFO convention attendees who claimed to have had personal contact with extraterrestrials to draw and describe their experiences. A sampling in here.
Camille, a beam of solid blue light came through her ceiling and transported her onto a table where she was surrounded by beings in white robes with high collars.
Bruce, An alien walked in from his bed to show him the moons of Saturn.
Lisa, a gray alien knocked at her door and handed her 2 babies, leaving her with a hole in her head.
Steve, he saw a beeping, bright white light. It zapped his friend up.
Nancy, her body responded to the low hum of the UFO spacecraft, a memory she accessed in regression therapy.
Rita, she has been visited by a golden reptilian alien throughout her life.
5. That asteroid looks an awful lot like a rocket ship. When Aunu Amulet, the name means first messenger in Hawaiian, was discovered floating through the solar system in October, CD Nuts immediately started checking the boxes that suggested the rod-shaped object might be an alien spacecraft of some kind. After all, it's the first interstellar object we've ever seen pass through the solar system. UFO enthusiasts point out that rods, along with flying saucers, are the 2 most common shapes cited by witnesses in UFO sightings, and the cigar shape would allow it to be slim enough to avoid collision with other objects as well as maximize aerodynamics for travel. Both the SETI Institute and the Breakthrough Listen Initiative pointed their instruments toward the object but found no unusual signals emitting from it. Of course, maybe it's an ancient relic from an interstellar civilization, or maybe the aliens just weren't interested in making contact. That asteroid nest could have just been camouflage with the object on its way out of the solar system. We may never know. In the fall of 2015, Penn State astronomer Jason Wright posited that erratic shifts in brightness coming from a newly discovered star 1,280 light-years from Earth couldn't be explained by exoplanets or other astrophysics that we understand. He theorized, instead, that the fluctuations may be the result of massive objects passing in front of the star in a kind of orbit, a whole array of massive satellites or other kinds of structures, presumably produced by a civilization of advanced intelligence. Go. In the fall of 2015 last year, 2 planets were discovered orbiting a red dwarf 12.36 light-years from Earth. At least one of these planets is in the Goldilocks zone, so Media International decided to beam some musical signals over to the planet with a closer proximity to Earth than most potentially habitable exoplanets. It'd be an exciting planet to start an interstellar pen-pal relationship with, assuming there's someone around to hear our notes and listen to them as a welcoming tune instead of a battle cry. And we're getting radio signals from something. Fast radio bursts, FRBs, are one of the most mysterious phenomena ever observed by scientists. Though they last only a few milliseconds, these pulses, first detected in 2007, emit more energy in that time than the sun does in 24 hours. 3 more were found this month, and we're no closer to understanding their origin, except that they're coming from outside the Milky Way. So, naturally, many experts have begun to think perhaps they're produced by an ultra-advanced civilization from afar, trying to speak to us through signals we can barely comprehend. 6. These masters of the universe are obsessed, they are also all men. Robert Bigelow. As a child, Bigelow watched the government test atomic bombs from his bedroom window, and he and his classmates could see the mushroom clouds bloom over the Mojave Desert from their school playground. To some, such memories are the stuff of dystopic Cold War hellscapes, but Bigelow remembers them as an epiphany. Even back then, Bigelow knew he wasn't going to be a scientist. He was lousy at math, so he resolved himself to make as much money as possible in the hopes that he could one day fund his own space program. He went on to make at least $1 billion with Budget Suites of America, long-term motel rentals around the Southwest. He now runs Bigelow Aerospace, which holds contracts with NASA and was a primary contractor for the Department of Defense's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Elon Musk is hell-bent on using his $21 billion to colonize Mars. His company, SpaceX, has been trying desperately to reduce the cost of space travel in the hopes of beginning a million-person colonization of Mars. If we're not in a simulation, then maybe we're in a lab, and there's some advanced alien civilization that's just watching how we develop out of curiosity, like mold in a petri dish, says Musk. Paul Allen, When Congress cut off funding for NASA's hunt for aliens in 1993, Allen gave millions to the SETI Institute. In 2009, the Allen Telescope Array started searching the cosmos. Allen has given an additional $30 million to the project, a sum that bought him a guarantee that if the array detects an extraterrestrial communique, Allen will be the first non-scientist to know. Yuri Milner. Last year, Milner, named after a Russian cosmonaut, announced a plan to send spaceships to Saturn's moon Enceladus in search of alien life. Milner is also funding Breakthrough Listen, a 10-year project to use a telescope in West Virginia to search for messages from intelligent life, and Breakthrough Starshot, in conjunction with Mark Zuckerberg and the late Stephen Hawking. Jeff Bezos. His company Blue Origin is competing with Elon Musk's SpaceX to launch reusable rockets and comically rich tourists into space. While Musk played himself in a cameo in Iron Man 2, Bezos appeared as an alien Starfleet official in 2016's Star Trek Beyond. It was not a speaking role. Why do I feel so much like Sigourney Weaver? Bezos said last March as he piloted a giant manned robot at Amazon's Mars conference. Franklin Antonio co-founded Qualcomm, a mobile tech company, in the mid-80s. He's also the company's chief scientist and has given millions to SETI research. Last year, Antonio gave $30 million to the University of California San Diego's School of Engineering and followed that donation up with a contribution to Roy Moore's failed Senate campaign. 7. As are some prominent military and government folks. Nick Pope. Know that there are people who watch our skies to protect the sleeping masses, Britain's former chief UFO investigator warns in his memoir. But also know that not all potential intruders into our airspace have two wings, a fuselage, and a tail, and not all show up on our radar. Pope's ominous counsel follows time he spent in the 90s inspecting thousands of paranormal incidents from crop circles to purported bedside abductions. He took that job certain this kind of stuff only happened to weirdos, but unexplainable sightings soon convinced him that there is a war going on with aliens. Worse, the UK Defence Ministry cut his old UFO desk's funding in 2009, so whatever's out there could attack at any time, Pope believes. Earthlings' diminished odds have gotten him more fatalistic lately too, after scientists suggested Oumuamua, a bizarre-shaped asteroid that's the first interstellar object to pass through our solar system, might be an alien spaceship. He argued in December we probably wouldn't survive an alien invasion anyway, because if they find us, it's clear who has the upper hand. Paul Hellyer, Canada's defense minister during the Cold War, now 94, believes that at least 80 species of aliens have been visiting Earth for millennia. One group is called the Tall Whites because they can reach basketball goal height, or Nordic Blondes because they look like they're from Denmark or somewhere. Unfortunately, the others may include eco-terrorists. We're doing all sorts of things which are not what good stewards of their homes should be doing, he told media in 2014. They don't like that, and they've made it very clear. Hellyer adds that many technological breakthroughs were aped from these extraterrestrials. Microchips and fiber optics, for instance, were taken off crashed alien vehicles and reverse engineered. The aliens have a special technology that would solve climate change as well, he claims, but the Illuminati are hiding it because it would devastate oil interests. Philip Corso. Corso's military career was long and illustrious, from rebuilding Rome's government after World War II as an army intelligence captain to having worked the Pentagon's foreign technology desk in the 60s. He doesn't appear to have said a word publicly about aliens until 1997, when Simon & Schuster published The Day After Roswell, with a foreword by Strom Thurmond, just 13 months before Corso died. It was his tell-all, outlining a decades-long Roswell cover-up while plugging his own clandestine exploits, which he claimed involved reverse engineering technology found on alien spacecrafts. This is how the world got lasers, particle beams, microchips, even Kevlar, Corso said. Skeptics argue that regular Earth people's R&D behind technology like lasers is impossibly well documented. Barry Goldwater. Had he won election in 1964, one of his White House's first acts might have been releasing top-secret UFO files. He harbored a lifelong fascination with the truth about extraterrestrial contact, much of it stemming from his desire to find out what was in the mysterious Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, home to the Air Force's Project Blue Book. In the 80s, it surfaced he'd spent decades corresponding with UFO investigators and harassing the military for access to the hangar's so-called Blue Room, where conspiracy theorists believe alien bodies from Roswell are preserved. Not only can't you get into it, his friend General Curtis LeMay supposedly snapped in 1975, but don't you ever mention it to me again. Goldwater claims he didn't. After retiring in 1987, the senator told Larry King the Earth is one of several billion planets in this universe. I can't believe that God or whoever is in charge would put thinking bodies on only one planet. Roscoe Hillenkoetter. After he'd served as the first CIA director, he'd been appointed by President Truman. Hillenkoetter retired from a distinguished Navy career in 1957 and took a gig at a brand new private research group called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Its chief purpose was pressuring the government to disclose what it knew about UFOs via investigations like Project Blue Book. Hillenkoetter went after the intelligence community, writing angry open letters that said things like, "It is time for the truth to be brought out in open congressional hearings." When he pointed out in 1960 that the Air Force had investigated 6,312 UFO reports to date but was seemingly trying to hide the facts, the military reminded Americans that no physical evidence, not even a minute fragment of a so-called flying saucer, has ever been found. Dennis Kucinich. Kucinich's 2008 presidential campaign didn't suffer from his admission, made during a live TV debate, that, back in 1982, he'd seen a UFO at friend Shirley MacLaine's Washington State home. He was polling around 4% at the time. But the current candidate for Ohio governor got mocked plenty. One joke among Beltway insiders was he wanted the little green vote. Staff were prepped to deny the encounter when reporters asked about the passage in MacLaine's 2007 New Age self-help book, Saging While Aging, that revealed Kucinich didn't just see a UFO, but had also felt a connection in his heart and heard directions in his mind. The other witnesses, a Juilliard-trained trumpeter working as MacLaine's bodyguard and his model girlfriend, also report having seen a trio of triangle-shaped aircrafts flying in tight formation. Her house was 50 miles from Mountain Rainier, a saucer magnet for UFO buffs because of all the nearby sightings, including America's very first flying saucer in 1947. Kucinich had the community's full support, even if he spent years playing coy. 8. And this genius thinks he can talk to them. Tim Urban, you created a language you think we might be able to use to communicate with aliens. So what exactly is it that we would want to say to the rest of the universe if we had the chance? Stephen Wolfram, I think the main difficulty is the definitional one. You talk about alien life, you talk about intelligence. What are those things abstractly? We know the specific example that we have historically been exposed to, life on Earth, human intelligence. The question is, when you generalize away from that, what do you get? One of the things that I'm fond of quoting is the statement the weather has a mind of its own. What does this mean? What is the abstract kind of thing that's like the mind? It's the ability to do sophisticated computation. That's something that exists in the weather, just as it exists in our brains, just as it exists in lots of living systems. And then, what's different between the weather and its sort of mind-like thing and our human intelligence? The fundamental answer to that is our human intelligence has its particular cultural civilizational history and the weather doesn't.
So is it that history that we'd want to communicate?
Yes, I think the thing to realize is that we in our civilization have followed a particular path. There are an infinite number of possible paths that we could have followed. To any other intelligence, our path would be quite mysterious.
Right, so we actually have unique information to communicate. You could have the most sophisticated species, and we can still tell them something they don't know about our history.
I'm particularly amused by Elon Musk's car going into space. That is so extremely aligned with the notion of grave goods from ancient Egypt, where you're taking things from your everyday life to be buried with you. It's charming.
9. There have been enough well-known encounters to fill encyclopedias. Barney and Betty Hill's abduction. The Hills, above, claimed that in 1961 a bright light swooped over their car on a New Hampshire road, and that they woke up a few hours later and the car had been magnetized. With regressive hypnosis, both were able to recall being abducted and probed by the little gray men, which soon became the de facto alien. Description: the Hills' captors were, interestingly, very similar to Selenites, the 5-foot moon inhabitants H.G. Wells invented for the first men in the moon. Betty astonished authorities when she began drawing a map of the constellation the creatures claimed to be from. Initially it looked like nonsense, until a few scientists noticed its resemblance to Zeta Reticuli, a system inside the constellation Reticulum largely unknown. In that year, their case generated widespread publicity, partly because they were a mixed-race couple in the 60s and turned into the flagship example of a close encounter, though not until years after the wow signal. In 1977, Ohio State's Big Ear radio telescope intercepted a 72-second burst of sound that bore signs of having come from interstellar space, which could be a sign of extraterrestrial communication. The anomaly measured 1,420 MHz, a frequency in the water hole, the term for a radio emission range thought ideal for intergalactic messages because it's unusually quiet. Jerry Emmond, the astronomer who spotted it, was so excited that he scribbled a giant "wow" on his printout. Astronomy's explanations for the bizarre phenomenon include secret spy satellites and a passing comet nobody knew about in 1977. But many admit nothing explains it adequately, and even if the signal doesn't prove aliens exist, it's still a tug on the cosmic fishing line. To date, it remains the best evidence of alien communication ever obtained. Kecksburg UFO crash. In 1965, an intense fireball streaked over southern Canada and Detroit and dropped debris over Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Officially, it was declared a mid-sized meteor, but eyewitnesses in the small Pennsylvania town of Kecksburg claimed they'd found an acorn-shaped object about the size of a VW Beetle in the woods that was festooned with hieroglyphics. Newspaper reporters on the ground said the military conducted a close inspection of the crash site, and despite the official line being that the search yielded absolutely nothing, conspiracists maintained the object was packed onto an army flatbed truck and that the whole thing was a Roswell-level cover-up. Travis Walton's abduction. In 1975, a team of loggers claimed their 22-year-old co-worker Travis Walton disappeared for 5 days after a glowing disc in the Arizona woods zapped him with a bluish ray. Intrigued, he'd reportedly wandered underneath the hovering object, and it abducted him. He claims he awoke on a table in a sterile-looking room, surrounded by 3 well-developed fetuses wearing tan robes. He tried to flee, passed out, then regained consciousness only once the aliens had ditched him on the Arizona roadside. The story received loads of publicity. Authorities thought Walton had been murdered, and 7 eyewitnesses corroborating a single close encounter was unheard of. The National Enquirer ultimately paid the group $5,000 for the story after they passed polygraphs, and Walton agreed to be interviewed by the tabloid's prestigious hypnotist. In 1993, Paramount released Fire in the Sky, a movie it said was based on the most famous case of UFO abduction ever recorded. The Warminster Thing. Warminster's long, controversial association with UFOs began in the English town on Christmas Day in 1964, when a local woman heard a crackling sound rip over her head. Other so-called sonic attacks plagued scores of others in town around the same time. Townspeople had no clue what was behind them, so they began blaming the thing. Additional reports of inexplicable lights in the sky made it clear the thing might have hailed from outer space. 10. And continuing right up to the present day. New encounters happen all the time, even to famous people. When Guillermo del Toro spotted one in Guadalajara, he says, "It was so crappy. It was a flying saucer, so cliched, with lights. Above, a sampling from ufosatingsdaily.com. We even have some pretty developed theories about why we haven't heard from Eastern Time yet. The aliens are all dead. Let's start with the most depressing theory. Maybe we haven't found extraterrestrials because they're all dead, at least now. The universe is 13.78 billion years old, and in that amount of time, there might have been plenty of civilizations that evolved and went extinct. The aliens are all sleeping. But maybe they're not dead, just hibernating. Another theory suggests that perhaps there's an extraterrestrial species out there that's so advanced it cannot efficiently make use of its technology right now because the universe's temperature is currently too high. Good news, though, the universe's temperature is cooling down, even as Earth's is heating up, so aliens may have decided to take a snooze for a few trillion years while they wait for colder weather that's more suited. The aliens are hiding. If even a genius like Stephen Hawking thought that aliens might destroy us if they ever were to find us, then maybe we should be a little afraid. Perhaps the aliens think the same thing, so they've gone into hiding from us. If another civilization were technologically savvy enough and had enough resources, it could build a massive orbital structure like a Dyson sphere to keep it cloaked from detection. Or it might use high-powered lasers to provide an optical facade that keeps its planet from being detected by telescopic instruments. The aliens are still evolving. Maybe alien life is actually everywhere, it's just not intelligent enough to speak with us. It took about 3.5 billion years of evolution to turn single-celled microbes into humans. Maybe we just happened to evolve faster and earlier than everyone else. Humans haven't spent enough time looking. Realistically speaking, we've only had the proper equipment to search for aliens for a little over half a century. On the scale of the cosmos, that time frame is less than a fraction of the blink of an eye. The process could take centuries or even millennia, optimistically speaking. The aliens are already here. This is where the conspiracy theorists get to go nuts. Yes, maybe the aliens are already here, and we just haven't figured it out yet. They might be taking some time to study us before unveiling themselves, or maybe they have already let themselves be known to certain groups. The truth isn't out there, it's here. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave the like. See you next time. Hey, don't leave anywhere, we have other cool videos, just click left or